There are moments that split a life into before and after, not the dramatic ones you see coming, not the arguments that build over weeks, not the falling outs that have been rehearsing themselves for years. The ones that split a life are the sudden ones. The ones that arrive without warning in the middle of an ordinary moment, in a room full of people you love, and change the temperature of everything permanently. This is one of those moments. And if you think you know where this story is going, stay with me. Because the moment that shocked that room was not the accusation. The accusation was just the beginning. What played on that screen 5 minutes later was something nobody in that ballroom was prepared for. And the silence that followed it was the loudest thing 200 people had ever heard together. Claire Hendricks was 41 years old on the day her brother got married. And she had spent most of those 41 years being the family member who holds things together without being thanked for the holding. The one who remembers the birthdays, organizes the gatherings, smooths the tensions before they become ruptures, and absorbs the cost of keeping a family functional without ever presenting anyone with the bill. She was not a martyr. She had simply been built for attentiveness, wired for the feelings of others, raised in a household where someone had to be the one who noticed, and that someone had always been her. Her brother Ryan was 37 and had always occupied the opposite position in the family. The one who was noticed, the one who was accommodated, the one whose needs organized the room rather than responded to it. Their mother, Margaret, had arranged her understanding of both her children around Ryan as the gravitational center, Claire's reliability as the thing that made Ryan's volatility manageable, Claire's steadiness as the ground that Ryan's drama could safely land on. Claire had made peace with this. She had built a life that did not depend on her family's accurate perception of her, a good marriage to a man named David who saw her completely, a career she found meaningful, and a daughter named Sophie who was, at 8 years old, the most important person in her world. Sophie was the kind of child who makes strangers stop and smile, not because of prettiness, though she was pretty, but because of a quality of presence that children occasionally carry before the world teaches them to dim it. She was observant and direct and laughed with her whole body and asked the questions adults had forgotten they were allowed to ask. She was to Claire simply and totally herself, and Claire had spent 8 years protecting that selfness with the quiet ferocity of a mother who understands exactly what it costs to lose it. She had almost not brought Sophie to the wedding. Long day, formal venue, Sophie had been fighting a cold the week before. But Sophie had asked, specifically asked, because she had a dress with small yellow flowers she had been waiting for the right occasion to wear, and because she wanted to try the fancy cake. Claire packed the flower dress and they arrived at the hotel ballroom. All three of them, Claire, David, Sophie, dressed and present and ready to celebrate something. The wedding was beautiful in the expensive, impersonal way of events that have had significant budgets applied to them without significant personal taste. The ceremony was at 2. The reception moved through its scheduled components: cocktail hour, dinner, speeches, first dance, with the smooth efficiency of a wedding coordinator who had done this 400 times. Sophie sat between her parents at dinner and ate as much of the formal plated meal as an 8-year-old could manage and asked twice if the cake was coming. Soon and accepted both times. The answer of not yet with the patience of a child who had been promised something and trusted the promise completely. It was during the loose milling hour between dinner and dancing and when guests move between tables and the bar and the small clusters of conversation that form and dissolve in the fluid social ecology of a large reception, that Ryan placed his iPhone 16 Pro on the table, near the gift display. He had been showing someone photographs on it, set it down to take a champagne glass from a passing server, and had, in the way of a man, accustomed to his belongings being managed by the environment around him, not immediately tracked where he'd put it. Claire was near the floor-to-ceiling windows, talking to David and her Aunt Patricia when she heard her name. She heard it before she processed anything else. Her name, in Ryan's voice. In the register her nervous system had been trained since childhood to recognize as the precursor to something she was going to need to manage. She turned. Ryan was standing near the gift table, with his champagne glass still in hand and an expression that had moved. In whatever had happened in the last 60 seconds, from the flushed satisfaction of a groom at his own reception to something Claire recognized and had always feared, the expression Ryan wore when he had decided something was someone else's fault and had already chosen the target. His best man, 2 groomsmen, their mother, and approximately 15 guests in the immediate vicinity had all oriented toward him with the collective attention that a raised voice in a social situation always produces. And standing 8 feet from him, alone near the gift table with her, hands at her sides and her yellow flower dress and an expression of complete, uncomprehending bewilderment, was Sophie. Claire was moving before she had consciously processed the scene, moving through the crowd, with the focused urgency of a mother, whose child is at the center of something wrong, arriving at Sophie's side, putting her hand on her daughter's shoulder, looking at Ryan. "Ryan, what's happening?" "What's happening?" he said with the brittle precision of a man who has had several glasses of champagne and is running on the momentum of a decision already made, "is that my iPhone was on this table and now it's not, and Sophie was the only person standing here." The words landed in the particular way that public accusations land, not just on the accused, but on every witness, pressing everyone in earshot into an immediate position of alliance or opposition. Claire said, "Sophie, do you have Uncle Ryan's phone?" Sophie looked up with the pure, direct eyes of a child who does not know how to manufacture an expression. "No, Mommy. I was just looking at the presents." "Ryan, she doesn't have your phone. She was the only one here. She's 8 years old. She doesn't steal things. She was looking at the presents. I'm not saying she meant to steal it. I'm saying she picked it up and I need it back." He looked at Sophie with the expression Claire would carry in her memory for the rest of her life. Not angry exactly, but dismissive. The expression of a man addressing someone too small to warrant full engagement. "Sophie, where did you put the phone?" Sophie's chin was doing the thing that chins do when an 8-year-old is trying not to cry in front of a large number of people. "I didn't touch it," she said, in the careful, controlled voice of a child, using every resource of self-composure she had. "I promise I didn't touch it." "Ryan!" Claire's voice crossed into a register she did not use often, not loud, not theatrical, but absolutely non-negotiable. "You are not going to speak to my daughter this way. She said she didn't touch it." "I know what I left on that table. Then someone else moved it. Look around. Ask someone. Do not stand there and accuse my 8-year-old daughter in front of 200 people because you put your phone down and forgot where." The room had quietly expanded around this exchange. The wedding coordinator was visible at the periphery, calculating. The DJ had lowered the music. 200 people at a wedding reception had found the organic center of their collective attention. And it was here, at the gift table, where a man in a morning suit was accusing a child in a yellow flower dress of stealing his iPhone on his wedding day. Ryan's mother appeared at his side. Claire's mother, Margaret. And this was the moment Claire would return to in the weeks and months that followed, the moment she would need to process in ways she had not anticipated. Her mother looked at the situation, her son, the missing phone, her granddaughter, and she put her hand on Ryan's arm and said, not to Sophie, not to Claire, to Ryan, "Are you sure she didn't just pick it up by accident, sweetheart? She might not have realized." The implication was unmistakable. Not did she do it, but the assumption that she had, dressed as a charitable interpretation of how. David arrived at Claire's other side. She felt him before she saw him, the specific warmth of her husband positioning himself. He put his hand on Sophie's other shoulder. So the child stood held between both parents. He said nothing, which was its own form of statement. Sophie was crying now, silently, in the controlled way that made it worse, not the open crying of a child who expects comfort, but the compressed crying of a child trying to make herself small enough that the attention moves elsewhere, tears running down her face, standing perfectly still in her yellow flower dress. Looking in that moment, so entirely like what she was, a child, 8 years old, accused of something in front of strangers, holding herself together by a thread, that Claire felt something move through her that was colder and more permanent than anger. She crouched to Sophie's level, put both hands on her daughter's face, said quietly and completely, "I believe you. Do you hear me? I believe you completely. This is not your fault." Then she stood and looked at her brother. "Look at what you've done," she said. "Look at her. She is 8 years old and she is crying. At your wedding, because you accused her of stealing. In front of 200 people. Without a single piece of evidence. Look at that." Ryan's jaw was set. The champagne and the day and his investment in his own narrative had carried him past the point where looking was comfortable. Vanessa appeared, Ryan's new wife, composed, reading the situation with the efficient attention of a woman who had not planned for this as a wedding reception event. She touched Ryan's arm, said quietly, "Ryan, let's just have someone check the room." "I know it was Ryan." Her voice had a quality in it that Claire would later recognize as the sound of a woman learning something important about the man she had married 6 hours ago. "Stop." He stopped. But it was a pause, and everyone in that room understood the difference. It was the wedding coordinator, a brisk, experienced woman named Helen, who had been running events at this hotel for 16 years, who suggested the CCTV. She said it calmly and professionally, addressing the room rather than any individual. The hotel had comprehensive security camera coverage of all event spaces. If there was a concern about a missing item, the security team could pull the relevant footage from the gift table area. Clear answer in approximately 5 minutes. She looked at Ryan when she said it, and Ryan, who had been running on accusation and could not now object to evidence without undermining his own position, said yes. The 5 minutes that followed were the strangest 5 minutes Claire had ever spent at a social event. The room did not return to its previous configuration. Guests remained, oriented toward the gift table. Some attempting conversations that dissolved after 3 exchanges, some simply waiting with undisguised anticipation. The DJ had stopped the music entirely. Sophie had been taken to a side room by David, who had leaned down and whispered something in her ear that made her nod and take his hand. And Claire had watched them go and felt simultaneously grateful and furious and frightened and completely still on the outside in the way she was always still when she most needed to be. Her mother came to stand beside her. Margaret said in a low voice, "I'm sure it will all get sorted out." "Ryan is just..." "Don't," Claire said, quietly, flatly. "Please don't explain. Ryan to me right now." Her mother went silent. Helen returned with a tablet. Beside her was the hotel's head of security, a heavy-set man named Graham, who had the expression of someone who had looked at the screen and come to terms with what was about to happen. He spoke briefly to Ryan, then held the tablet up so the immediate group could see it. Ryan, Vanessa, Claire, their mother. The best man, several guests who had remained close. Helen pressed play. The footage was high definition. The gift table was clearly visible. The timestamp ran from the relevant 45-minute window of cocktail, hour and early reception. It showed Sophie arriving at the gift table at 17 minutes past 6. It showed her looking at the presents with the careful attention of a child who has been told not to touch and is honoring that instruction, leaning forward to read cards, looking at ribbons, hands at her sides. It showed her standing there for approximately 3 minutes. It showed her turning and walking away with her hands visible and completely empty. It showed 8 minutes after Sophie left, a man in a gray suit reaching past the gift display, picking up the phone with one hand, glancing left and right in a single furtive motion, and sliding it into his jacket pocket. The man was not Sophie. The man was not a child. The man was identifiable, and one of the groomsmen standing 2 feet from the tablet made a sound, a very specific, very involuntary sound, and said, "That's Marcus." Marcus, a friend of Ryan's from university, seated at table 7, still in the ballroom in his gray suit, approximately 40 feet from where this conversation was happening. The room froze, not metaphorically. People actually stopped moving. The DJ had cut the music entirely, and the ballroom was held in the specific silence of 200 people processing the same information simultaneously and arriving at the same place at the same speed. The collective intake of breath was almost audible. Heads turned toward table 7. Someone near the bar set down their glass very slowly. Ryan was staring at the tablet. His face moved through phases in real time. The automatic skepticism of a man whose narrative is being challenged, then the unwilling recognition of what he was actually seeing, then something Claire had never seen on her brother's face in 37 years of knowing him, something she could only describe later as the specific horror of a man who understands all at once, without any available exit, exactly what he has done. He had accused a child, his sister's child, his 8-year-old niece in a yellow flower dress, in front of 200 people, on his wedding day, and she had been standing at the gift table reading cards with her hands at her sides, and the phone had been taken by a man in a gray suit 8 minutes after she walked away. Helen quietly handed the tablet to Graham, who moved with the practiced efficiency of hotel security toward table 7. The guests near Marcus became aware of his approach. Conversation stopped. Marcus looked up, saw Graham coming, and went a color that people nearby would later describe as matching his suit. The iPhone was recovered from his jacket pocket. Police were called as a formality. Marcus was escorted from the building without drama, because the evidence was absolute and he had nothing left to perform. None of that was what Claire was watching. She was watching Ryan. He turned from the tablet and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and what passed between them in those 4 seconds was 37 years of everything. The childhood and the imbalance and the accommodation and the enabling, and all the times she had managed his damage and absorbed his certainty and made peace with being the one who held things while he was the one who was held. All of it, in a single look, in a hotel ballroom in front of 200 people and a silent DJ and a wedding coordinator who had seen everything and would remember all of it. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it. "Claire." "Not right now," she said. She walked to the side room. She opened the door. Sophie was sitting on a small sofa with David's jacket over her shoulders. The air conditioning was cold and he had draped it around her, eating a bread roll he had apparently sourced from somewhere, because David was the kind of man who, when his daughter was distressed, located food. Sophie looked up when Claire came in, and her expression was the expression of a child who has been through something hard and is very glad to see her mother. Claire sat beside her. She gathered her daughter into her arms, jacket and bread roll and all, and held her with the full force of everything she had been holding in the ballroom. The anger and the grief and the love and the ferocious, permanent protectiveness that had been building since the moment she heard her name in her brother's voice and turned to find her child standing alone and accused. Sophie pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and cried properly, the real crying, the release that had been waiting behind the controlled version for the last 45 minutes, held back with the extraordinary discipline of an 8-year-old who did not want to cry in front of 200 strangers. "I told the truth," Sophie said into her mother's shoulder. "I know, baby. I know you did. Uncle Ryan didn't believe me." Claire held her tighter. "I know. The camera believed me." Claire pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and stayed there for a moment. Then she said, "The camera showed everyone else what I already knew. I believed you before the camera. Do you understand that? I believed you the second you told me." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she said, "Is there cake yet?" Claire laughed. It surprised her. Surprised David, who was sitting in the chair across from them, and whose face had been carrying the controlled fury of a father who had watched his daughter publicly accused and was managing the very specific challenge of remaining composed in a formal setting when every instinct was pointed in the opposite direction. He laughed too, the laugh of relief and love and the particular, irreplaceable comedy of a child who returns to the essential question after everything. They stayed in the side room for 20 minutes. When they came out, the ballroom had reorganized itself. The music had restarted, quieter, and guests were distributed throughout the space with the slightly dazed quality of people at an aftershock. Ryan and Vanessa were near the bar with Helen, and Ryan's posture, the confident centrality that had always defined him in rooms, was completely gone. He looked diminished in the way people look, diminished when the architecture of a self-image has just experienced a structural failure. He came to her. She had known he would and had spent the 20 minutes deciding what she would do when he did. He crouched down to Sophie's level, and Claire watched her. Brother, the man who had built his life on the assumption that rooms organized around him, that the people who loved him absorbed his costs, that his surety was a form of authority. She watched him look at her daughter and find, in that specific encounter with what he had done to a child in a yellow flower dress, something that none of his other mistakes had ever produced. He said, "Sophie, I was wrong. I accused you of something you didn't do, and I said it in front of a lot of people, and I am so sorry. You told the truth and I didn't listen. That was my failure, not yours. I am sorry." Sophie looked at him with the direct, assessing eyes of a child who has been through something real and is deciding what she thinks about the person in front of her. She was quiet for a full moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you believe me?" The question was so simple and so complete and so entirely without cruelty. Just a child asking a real question, with the honest bewilderment of someone who genuinely wants to understand that Ryan could not answer it immediately. He looked at the floor. He looked back at her. He said slowly, "Because I was angry, and I wanted a fast answer, and I looked for the nearest person instead of the right one. And that was wrong. And you deserved better from me." Sophie considered this. She said, "Okay, then is there cake yet?" Claire's laugh came from somewhere below the anger and the grief, from the place where her daughter existed as herself, entirely, incorruptibly, unchanged by what the evening had put her through. She laughed and heard David laugh and saw, at the edge of her vision, Ryan's smile in the broken, grateful way of a man who has just been given a grace he knows he has not earned. Before they left that evening, Claire went to Ryan one final time. She chose to go, not because she had been moved or pressured, but because she had decided what she needed to say, and she was not a woman who left important things unsaid. She said, "I need you to understand what happened tonight. Not the phone. Marcus, the footage, that part is handled. The other part, the part where Sophie told you she didn't do it and you decided what you already believed, mattered more than what she was saying. I need you to sit with that for a long time. Not because I want you to suffer, because she is your niece and she loves you, and she is going to remember tonight for the rest of her life. And what I need, what I'm asking you for, is to become the person whose response to that memory changes as she gets older. Not the man who accused her, the man who learned something from it. That is what I need from you." Ryan said, "I want to be that." She said, "Wanting is the start, doing is the rest." She took Sophie's hand. David took Sophie's other hand. They walked out through the hotel lobby and through the revolving doors into the warm night air. And Sophie tipped her head back and looked at the sky and said, "Can we get a dog?" Claire said, "Absolutely not." Sophie said, "But I had a really hard day." Claire said, "We can discuss a fish." Sophie said, "A fish is not a dog, Mommy." "No," Claire said, "but it's a start." They walked to the car, the three of them, the yellow flower dress catching the light of the hotel entrance behind them. And Claire felt something settle in her chest that was not quite peace and not quite resolution, but was something real and earned. The feeling of having stood between her daughter and something that should never have been aimed at her, and having held completely, not as an accommodation of someone else's certainty, not as the family member who absorbs the damage, but as herself, fully and without apology, as the mother who believed her daughter before the footage, who said, "I believe you" before the screen confirmed it, who did not need the camera to know the truth. The camera had shown the room what was real. Claire had known from the first second. And Sophie, who would grow into a woman, who told the truth in difficult rooms, because she learned at 8 years, old in a yellow flower, dress that truth and patience always find each other eventually. Sophie got in the back seat, buckled her belt, and said with complete authority, the cake was worth it. It was. It really, truly was. If you are watching this, and you know what it is to have your truth doubted, to say, "I didn't do this," and watch the